picture on the screen that we'll be sharing more widely. And just one final note on that first slide is just to say that after this evening, we will be sending out a form. We won't be using the chat function this evening, but if you do have any questions following the presentation tonight, you will be able to send those in to us on a form that we'll send through electronically for you. You send those back into us, and what we will do is we'll collate those into a frequently asked questions response back to you. Unless, of course, it's something individual about your personal child, in which case we will handle that, obviously, in a confidential manner. So I guess just to start off by saying that ordinarily at this time of year, our Year 11 and Year 13 will have spent many weeks and months, hopefully, preparing for their final examinations in the summer term. And we know that therefore at this time of year that they are anxious, but hopefully very well prepared for those exams. But I think we all know that this past year has been no ordinary year. And we fully appreciate, as all staff at the Misbourne, we fully appreciate some of the worry and anxiety that sits behind that, both for our students and their families. And we hope that tonight will help to rest assure you and alleviate some of those worries and stresses, if not take it away completely. But hopefully the work that we have been doing and that teachers have been doing over the course of the last few weeks, as information about the process has developed, has helped to reassure our young people already. And I have to say, both Year 11 students and Year 13 have been fantastic. They really are a credit to themselves, to their families, and to us as a school. The way they have come back and the way that they've worked during the lockdown period. So let me just go through what tonight we will actually be covering. If Mr. Lyons wouldn't mind moving on to the next slide, thank you. So there are kind of two parts to it. The first part we'll be looking at an overview of the current situation. So nationally, what is it that schools have been asked to do in order to get to the point of awarding grades for students this year in both year groups? What we are going to be doing over the final 4 or 5 weeks that we have left with students in school, and then a short period after that with teachers, and an explanation of how students' grades will be determined. And then the latter part of the presentation will go over the results days, the appeals process, and the next steps for students once those grades have been submitted. Now, there's a couple of things that tonight won't be covering, and I think when you see them, you will appreciate why. This obviously isn't a forum for us to discuss or talk about any individual grades for students, or to be able to answer individual questions. As I said at the start, there will be a form that we will send out afterwards, and that will be your opportunity to be able to send those in to us. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Lyons for the remainder of the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So to basically introduce, if I could just go back over what Joe Maloney said just about turning off your cameras if you've got them off, or sorry, on, and turning off your microphones as well, because the presentation is being recorded. So if you could do that, that would be really good. So what's happening? I'm sure there's probably not an individual on this call at the moment that isn't aware of the current situation, but the exams have been cancelled for this year. And by exams, I mean the formal turn up, sit in a hall and sit and answer your exam papers. And that is mostly because of the disruption to learning and the gaps that there may well be in young people's learning, that if you have got an exam paper and you are being assessed on just that exam paper, then the decision was made that that may well be unfair. Now, as a school, we've been quite lucky in terms of the amount of time that Year 11s have been out of school. But there are school and Year 13, there are schools that those year groups have been out for a considerable amount of time. So those changes were made at a national level. So instead of that, what we have this year is a set of teacher assessed grades. Now, in education, we love an acronym. You can already see from that first slide, there's quite a few there. So when I'm talking about tags, I'm talking about these teacher assessed grades that will be created this year. So in terms of what is the difference between a tag and an exam, already mentioned the fact that it's not that turn up and sit down in a hall. A number of tasks can be included in the creation of the tags, and the content that is included in that can only cover what our students have been taught. So if part of the syllabus hasn't been covered in a particular subject, then that would not be included in the work that we are using to create the tags. Ordinarily, those assessments in the hall, but we can use classwork. So I know that year 11 and year 13 sat a series of assessments before Easter, and that will play a major part in the creation of the tags, but it is not the only thing. We can use classwork. We can use the assessments that subjects are currently carrying out. So all of that information that we have gathered can be used in the production of the tags. A difference again, the tags will be marked by our teachers and they'll be moderated within the school. There is a process of quality assurance, and I will go through that a little bit later. In terms of the similarities between the normal exams and the tags, exam arrangements will still be included. So any special consideration that needs to be taken into account, that's still part of our process in school. What we are also using is material from exam boards. So exam boards have released papers, they've released marking schemes that we are using. They have also released a set of grade descriptors that we would use to give us an idea of where each young person should sit in terms of their grading. So there are a number of differences, but there are also some similarities between what we have done previously and what we are doing this year. The situation is also different to last year. The situation that started and then changed, and the situation we ended up with this year is a completely different situation. In terms of the judgments that teachers are going to make on those grades then, so I've talked about the evidence that we can use in terms of past papers, assessments, both that we've devised ourselves and also that have been released by the exam boards, and coursework, if it's relevant in subjects like PE, art and drama, that will be included, and also the classwork, sorry. One important thing to say at the bottom there is that what JCQ, so JCQ is an organisation that controls exams for the whole of the UK, and the exam boards have to answer to JCQ, and as a school, as an exam centre, we have to answer to JCQ as well. And what they have said is that this year, it will be no easier or harder for a young person to achieve a grade than it has been in previous years. And that's really important, that as these young people go forward into the next stages of their lives, that they're not going to be disadvantaged by the situation that they've been put in, and it's no fault of their own. So in terms of going forwards, what the teachers will do is they will let the students know this is the evidence that we are using for this particular qualification to generate the teacher assessed grades. So whether that is a piece of coursework, whether it is the assessments that happened just before Easter, I can't imagine that there's not going to be a subject that's not going to use those, but the evidence that is going to use will vary between the subjects, but our students will be told that this is what we are going to be using. And therefore it gives the students that opportunity to say that it is their work. Because one of the issues that you've got this year, obviously part of the learning at the end of year 10 or the end of year 12, and then obviously this year at the start of 2021, we had a period where students were not in school. So being able to sort of judge the quality of the work, but also confirm it is that student's work is really important. And that's one of the things that we will be looking at as well. What we're also allowed to do is to take into account those mitigating circumstances. So if an individual student has been in a particular circumstance, and that can be taken into account in the same way that exam access arrangements are normally taken into account, other situations are taken into account. And that happens in, each year. Every year there will be somebody who will break their arm falling off their bike or their skateboard, and it's normally their writing arm that they break. I don't know how they manage to do that, but normally it is. And that would be taken into account as well in terms of that special consideration. And that will happen this year, but there is a wider range of things that can be taken into account to make sure that an individual student is not unduly penalised because of the circumstances that they've been in. So in terms of those judgments, the students will only be assessed on the work that they have produced. Okay, so they've been taught. If the subject has not covered a unit, that will not be part of the assessment because they've not been taught for that. And in terms of that lost learning that they've had, that will be included in the grades that we produce. So we can't disadvantage students. And if absence has been in place because of any COVID-related situation, then again, those are the sorts of things that we can take into account. What we do have to do is to make sure that all of the grades are submitted to the exam boards by the 18th of June. That is our deadline. So the grades that we collect, the grades that we have moderated, the grades that we have quality assured, all of that has to be with the exam boards by the 18th of June. So that's our final deadline. In terms of the awarding of the grades, so the list of evidence we will collect and we will collate, we will also look at the weighting that each individual element will carry. So something like the assessments that happened just before Easter are likely to carry quite a significant weighting. A piece of coursework, so in a subject like PE, you have got the practical element that carries 40% of that final award. So that gives us the weighting for those elements. End of topic tests could come in there as well, but they may well carry a slightly lower weighting. And something that has been done in the class in year 10 can still be, or year 12 can still be included. But again, the weighting for that assessment is likely to be lower than those assessments that we know are in a completely controlled environment that have been marked and moderated across the school. What we will also do is look at the marks and look at the evidence we've got and use those grade descriptors from the exam boards, so that we know that if we are giving a young person a grade 6 in GCSE PE, then that 6 is going to fall in line with other students across our school and also other students across the country. And that moderation within school and then moderation across schools is really, really important, because these young people are going to take these grades with them into the next stages of their lives. In terms of the fairness of awarding the grades, again, it's really important that we ensure that there is no bias applied to the grades that we're awarding, and make sure that any of those circumstances that these young people have been in are taken into account. So what we have had to do already as a school is to submit our centre policy to JCQ to outline these are the people that are involved in this process. This is how we are going to go through the process to make sure that each grade is awarded fairly and is awarded in line with the exam board's requirements. What we will also need to do is take into account where the school has been previously. So what grades have subjects achieved previously? What grades has the school achieved previously? Now, this will be years 2019, 18 and 17. 2020 is not being taken into account because that was a completely different situation. But we do need to look back at previous years and be able to justify where there's been any changes in those grades that we have awarded. The exam boards themselves will have their own quality assurance process. So they'll be looking at what we are doing. They will be asking for information from us. They may well carry out an inspection, a virtual inspection. Never done one of those. That will be interesting. An inspection of our school to ask for evidence, to ask what was the process within these individual subjects, to make sure that the evidence that we have gathered fulfills the requirements, to make sure that it's consistent across the school, to make sure that it's consistent with other schools as well. And as part of the process, when we get into that moderation and standardization, working with other schools as well will be part of that process, so that we can have our sociology teacher linking with a sociology teacher in another centre to make sure that we're following sort of like a similar process to make sure we're in line with them. So it's not just an internal process. We'll also be linking with other schools to make sure we are, the grades that we are awarding are fair and are just for each individual student in each of their qualifications. What we will also be required to do is to submit a sample of evidence to JCQ, again, so they can go through this quality assurance process. So to make sure that what we have collected actually justifies the grade that we have awarded. So teachers will begin to collect evidence. Now, I know that we didn't know we were going to do this. So students will have work that's possibly in the corner of a bedroom somewhere. Possibly there's a little bit of work from the beginning of year 10 in the bottom of a bag somewhere. If that has been used as part of the evidence, then obviously the teachers have got their mark books. They may well not have the specific exam paper anymore, and the weighting therefore would have to take that into account. But that work can be included, and that professional judgment from the teachers is really important. And if we're showing that we've got all of these processes in place, then that professional judgment is completely and utterly justified. What we are not allowed to do is to take representations from families. We cannot be in a situation where the families think that a young person should get a specific grade, and if we've awarded another grade, we can't change the grade because the families are asking for it. If we did that, and the only reason we're changing the grade is because of what has been asked of us, then that would be regarded as malpractice. I'll come to an appeals process, and there is a process to go through if a young person believes they should have got a different grade, but that sort of suggestion that a young person should get a grade, and if that suggestion is coming from the family, then we can't take that into account. But again, as I've said before, specific circumstances can come into that. And we've already started the process of gathering that information that we know about the young people that we've got in our school, so we can take all of those individual circumstances into account. In terms of the awarding of the grades, normally there's a week between them, but there's only a couple of days this year, and they are slightly earlier than normal. So the year 13s will receive their grades on Tuesday the 10th of August, and year 11 will receive their grades on Thursday the 12th of August. What I will say now, and ordinarily I'll be saying this each week in an assembly in front of the students, the exam results belong to that young person. So when they are released on those days, if you are lucky enough to be somewhere in this country, or who knows, maybe in a different country, laying on a beach during those days, we can still get the results to you. We could either email them to you, or we could send it out by post, but the request has to come from the young person. We can't give out those exam results to a family member unless we've got permission from that young person. The young person could give permission for anybody to pick them up, but the permission has to come from that young person. I will repeat this to the year group so that they've got that in their head as well. What we're also not allowed to do is to release any grades before the date. So in terms of things like the assessments that happened just before Easter, what students are being given, they're being given information. So they're being given information about where they've done well, where they could improve, and in a number of subjects, they're being given the marks that they have been awarded. But what they are not being given is the grades. We are not allowed to release the grades before August. There is a whole quality assurance process that we need to go through. So what I don't want to happen is for a young person to be under the impression that they're going to get a specific grade, but actually when that process has gone through, that grade changes, because that is unfair on those young people. So I know that's a slightly different situation than we would have normally, but again, that is something that we have been told that we are not allowed to do. We're not allowed to release these grades before the official release in the middle of August. Talked earlier about not being able to take into account representations from families, but there is an appeal process. Ordinarily, that appeal process is based on the exam paper, because ordinarily that young person sits in the hall, they answer those, whether it's 2 papers, 3 papers, whatever it is for that particular qualification. The appeal ordinarily is looking at the paper, And the starting point would be counting up the marks and looking at the grade boundary. What we have got this year, we've got grade descriptors, but they're not necessarily marks, and therefore there is no grade boundary. There is a grade descriptor, but there is a process for an appeal. What we will do is we'll give you the window for the appeals closer to the time, so that you know what you need to do. And there's a couple of stages to the appeal that young people and families can go through. The first instance will be an appeal to the school. And what we need to do is we need to look at the process that has been carried out. We need to look at all of that evidence that we have gathered. We need to look at all of the standardization and the moderation that has happened to make sure that the grade that that young person has been given fairly, and it meets the policy that we've set up. We also need to make sure there's been no clerical errors and that there's been no bias in the awarding of that grade. If we discover that we have made an error, then what we would need to do is to submit the updated grade to the exam board, and then what they will do is they will issue a revised grade, and that will be the only grade that exists on that young person's record. The second stage of this is that if we believe there is no error and we've followed that process accurately and there is no bias and all the standardization and the moderation is held up, then the young person can still appeal against that grade, and that would go to the exam board. And what the exam board would do is they would ask for specific evidence for that young person, and it's very likely that they'll also look at the processes that we've put in place to make sure that that process has been fair, to make sure that process has been accurate, to make sure that we're using all the information that we've been given by the exam boards. We've been using those grade descriptors, so there's no error that is made. If the exam board agrees that there's been an error, then they will issue a new grade. And again, that will be the grade that exists on that young person's record. There is a final stage to that if you think the grade should change and we don't think that there's been an error in our process and the exam board don't think that there's been an error in their process, you can appeal to Ofqual. So Ofqual as a body itself has its own process, and they will look at what the exam board has done. They will also look at what the school has done, and they will make a final judgment as to which grade should be awarded. The one thing that I will say is that grades can go up and grades can go down as a result of an appeal. So during that process, and this is not to say that you shouldn't do it, but you need to be aware that the grades can go up or they can go down. Again, ordinarily, it is a mark that is turned into a percentage that then is compared against the grade boundary. This year, the process is different, and we will be using the evidence and the marking and the moderation and standardization of that evidence in order to produce the grade using those grade descriptors that the exam boards have released. In terms of next steps, so we are currently in a situation where a number of assessments have happened and moderation is already taking place. Standardization is already taking place. And as a school, we are gathering that evidence. We're looking at where we are and what we've got. And in the processes we're going through over the next weeks, teaching is still going to happen. Okay, so teaching will carry on until Friday the 28th of May for year 11 and Thursday the 27th of May for year 13. I know that some of the students that I've been talking to think that, oh, it's done, I've finished. I did my assessments before Easter, you've got my mark, that's all that needs to happen. That's not true. Teaching is still happening and assessments are still being carried out. And those conversations with young people about that evidence is still going on. So it's really, really important that students are still in their lessons, they're still working hard, and they're still completely and utterly engaged in their learning. The process does not finish until we've collected all that evidence. Ultimately, the process does not finish until we send off those grades to the exam board. And at that point, which is the final deadline for that is the 18th of June, at that point, we have completed our process and everything has gone off. But until that point, it's really important that we have that engagement. So that moderation and that standardization that is happening You'll be aware that we've got our inset day, the first day back after half term on the 7th of June. That again is a day for us in terms of moderation, in terms of the whole school coming together to look at the grades, and that is our one agenda item on that day, literally to spend the time with the work from year 11 and year 13 and making sure that all of that moderation, all of that standardization fulfills the criteria that's been set by JCQ, by Ofqual, and that we are consistent across our school. So when those grades arrive in August, we know we have followed that process robustly, and we've done everything we can possibly do to make sure that the grade reflects the standard of the work that those young people have carried out. What I will do after this is I will send out a summary document. I will also send out the slides for this evening, so that you've got all of the information that you might need in terms of understanding what the process is this year. And as Joe said at the beginning of the presentation, I'll also send out a form for you to put questions to us. What I would like to do with that is to turn it into almost like an FAQ. So within that process, it'll ask you for sort of like the topic that your question relates to, so that I can group those together and sort of put all the common questions together and send that out. The form itself, you can fill in as many questions as you want, but it will come through sort of one question at a time for me. So again, we can sort of organize those questions and send them out to you. If in your question, if it is a specific question about a specific subject, please put the subject in your question, because again, that will help. If it is a really pertinent question for your son or your daughter, then obviously we'd look to reply to you individually. But what I want to make sure is that all of our families are completely and utterly aware of what this process involves, what we are doing to collect and collate the information, and the fact that what we have at the heart of this is these young people that have been through a very turbulent year, to say the least. Their learning has been affected. Home learning it was completely different, and virtual learning is completely different. Some young people took to it really well, some young people struggle with that, but that will have had an impact on the learning for our students. And as I've said previously, the grades that they are going to be awarded in August are going to be the grades that they are going to take with them for the rest of their lives. So I don't underestimate the importance of this process, which is why we've spent time thinking about it. We've spent time talking to other schools. We've spent time reading all of the documentation that has been released by exam boards, by JCQ, by Ofqual, to make sure that all of our processes are in line. The last 2 days will be celebration events, because we want to celebrate the end of this part of the journey for these young people. And for year 13s on Thursday, the 27th of May, and then for the year 11s on Friday, the 28th of May. So that celebration day, or celebration event, sorry, the information will come out in terms of what is going to happen, and we'll have a number of assemblies about that, so everybody knows exactly what is involved and what is happening towards the end of this year. After half term, because our teaching will still carry, even though we've, in terms of the vast majority of teaching, it is likely to end at half term. There may well be individual students that we're looking at to gather more information, but the vast majority of our students, the teaching is going to end. What we do need to do is to make sure that we're still supporting our students as they go forward in terms of their next steps. So whatever those steps may be, whether it is that they're looking to apply for our sixth form to move into year 12, so what preparation work could they be doing? If it is for year 13 and they've finished their A-levels or their other qualifications they may well be studying, again, is there anything that they haven't studied that would really help them going forward into their next steps, whether that be because they are using that particular qualification at university, or whether it's for their next steps in terms of college, which it may be for a year 11. If there's anything that we haven't covered, that would be important, then we would be looking to give them that work so they can use that as well to sort of allow them to make those next steps into the next phase of their life. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope that I've given you an overview. I'm very well aware that there's a huge amount of information that I've just put in front of you, which is why we'll follow this up with a document that attempts to summarize everything that I've covered, and also those questions that you can ask to put to us if you still are unsure of the process, whether it's a general thing or whether it is specific for your son or your daughter. So again, I hope this evening has been informative. I hope you have got a much better understanding of the process that we're going through this year, as opposed to a normal year. And the aim of the process and the aim and what is behind everything we do is to make sure that those young people are awarded the grades that reflects the work that they've done and reflects the standard of their work they've done, even with all the disruption that we've had since March 2020. So thank you so much for turning up this evening to listen to me. Again, I hope that it's been informative. I hope that it's really helped you. I'll send information out and with a copy of the presentation and also that summary information, possibly tomorrow, so that you've got that to use as well. Okay. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy what looks out of my window to be a slightly gloomy evening, but I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.